Okay, so welcome everybody to the latest talk of the RACS network. And this week, or this lecture, we have Jeffery Long joining us. He's a professor of religion, philosophy, and Asian studies at Elizabethtown College. And he's also a series editor of the Explorations in Indic Traditions, which is published by Lexington Books. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeffery. I don't think I have anything else particularly to add. So do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about who you are, what your interests are, and then we'll go straight into your talk? Does that sound good?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak to all of you today. And as Richard just says, I'm Jeffery Long. I've been in the field of teaching and scholarship for a little over 25 years. And most of my publications, most of my writings are on Hinduism and another Indic tradition, Jainism, which is a little less known in the Western world, but I've written an introductory textbook to Jainism. My most recently, I've published a book on Hinduism in America for Bloomsbury. And then for Routledge, I've co-edited a short volume on nonviolence in the world's religions. So my interests are pretty wide-ranging, but focused primarily on traditions of India. And however, I'd have to also say I've been a science fiction fan all my life, and very interested in the question of extraterrestrial life, extraterrestrial intelligence. And I see a lot of convergence across various fields in terms of the kinds of questions we're raising. So people who are in astronomy, physics, astrobiology, and of course, philosophers of science, but also philosophers of religion. And my basic theme today, my thesis really, is that the traditions of India have been thinking and talking about a vast cosmos with many worlds and many forms of intelligence for centuries, in fact, millennia. This is not a new idea. And in fact, interestingly, part of what piqued my own interest in Hinduism, especially at an early age, was the fact that so many aspects of it seem to fit so well into sci-fi, right? Like I said, I'm a longtime science fiction fan. And if you start looking at the universe as conceived, or the universes of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, these traditions, there is a lot of affinity with the idea that, of course, there are many forms of intelligence, many worlds, many realms, and that this is not an idea that should shock us particularly. And so this is something that I want to focus on in my talk. So I'll share my screen, and let me get my slideshow going. So hopefully everyone can see this. My title page, the worlds as numerous as the grains of sand of the Ganges. This, in fact, is an expression that one finds in several ancient Indian texts, but I'm most familiar with Buddhist sources that use this particular phrase. But this is, again, this is the idea that the traditions of India have long thought in this way, that the cosmos is vast and that there are many worlds. I have here the photo of the Hubble, the famous Hubble Deep Field photo, which of course is now being superseded by the James Webb Deep Field and the various things that telescope is now showing us. My subtitle here is, which really gets more to the heart of my talk, is Cosmic Pluralism and Swami Vivekananda's Religion of the Future. So let me get into that. My influences in terms of the approach I take to these issues, my perspective, is shaped a great deal by the work of Alfred North Whitehead. This is something Andrew, of course, will talk about a great deal when he comes also. The conference that Chelsea and I were involved in was basically philosophers who have been in various ways shaped, influenced by Whitehead and the what is now called the field of process thought, process philosophy, process theology. This goes back to the thought of Whitehead, and the relevance of his ideas will become apparent as my talk unfolds. Another very important influence on my perspective and really my main focus today is a tradition called Vedanta. Vedanta is a philosophy that is a part of the Hindu tradition. It's one of the main schools of thought in Hinduism. And Swami Vivekananda has been one of its great exponents in the modern period. He was the first Hindu spiritual teacher to gain a large following in the United States. He famously spoke at the World Parliament of Religions in 1893 and really created quite a large body of work in terms of essays, books, public lectures that have been published as his complete works. And he did all of that within a very short period of time because he came and spoke in Chicago in 1893. And then by 1902, he passed away in India on July 4th of 1902. So he died young, 39. But in that short time, he made the larger world beyond India much more aware of Vedanta and Hindu philosophy and Indian thought general than it had been. I am personally a practitioner within his tradition. He established something called the Vedanta Society in New York in 1894. There are now Vedanta societies throughout the United States. My wife and I are both members of that organization. So Swami Vivekananda's thought is something I'm going to be focusing on a great deal here as well. So this picture is of, this is a very modern rendition of it, but this is an ancient Jain understanding, the Jain tradition, another tradition of India, a Jain map of the cosmos, essentially. You see a variety of universes, and they are nested on top of one another. And their arrangement, top to bottom, is based on the principle of karma, right? The principle of cause and effect. So whatever actions we engage in, on the level of thought, on the level of word, or on the level of physical action, all of these things have effects in the universe. And because everything is one, according to Indian thought, everything is interconnected. Whatever we say, whatever we do, whatever we think eventually returns back to us, echoes back to us, you could say, in the form of an experience that may be pleasant if the energy we were putting out is also benevolent and kindly and compassionate, we'll have good experiences. And whatever negativity we put out, anger, violence, selfishness, greed, that also comes back in the form of suffering. And this is sort of basic to Indian philosophical traditions. And the idea of karma fuels the concept of rebirth, or as it's sometimes called in the West, reincarnation. The idea being that the sum total of the effects of your actions are not necessarily exhausted at the time of the death of the body. All of these traditions teach that what we really and truly are is not the body. The body is more or less a vehicle for consciousness that is evolving across many lifetimes and arriving at a higher level of awareness, a higher level of realization. And karma is essentially the universe's tool for the kind of trial and error process that we're engaged in across many lifetimes. And as it pertains to our topic today, according to all of these traditions, and I'm thinking broadly of Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions, the field in which this karma plays itself out, the places where we could be reborn and live and experience the effects of karma and create new karmas, is vast. It includes our universe as we know it today. In ancient times, it was thought of much more, in a more localized way in terms of the earth. But the idea was that beyond the realm that we can experience with the senses, there are these other places, and there are realms of very positive karma where beings can be reborn, and they are celestial beings, they are deities, angels, divinities. So they live in these upper universes that you see here. And then there are unpleasant places, right? You have the hellish beings, as the slide says. And those unfortunate beings are the ones with the very bad karma. We're somewhere in the middle, the human realm. So this basic picture, the one I've given here is the Jain version of this, but something like this is held in Hinduism and Buddhism as well. And of course, if you think of Western religions, you have also, heaven, earth, and hell, sort of thinking much more in terms of this world. But the idea of many, many planes of existence, many realms, many worlds where we might exist, is very, very old in India. And the idea that we may be reborn in many different forms, right? That what you might call the soul, right? The Atman, or that is the Jiva, the life force, does not simply take human form, but it can be reborn in animal forms, plant forms, but also in the forms of these other beings in other realms and other worlds. So if you come from that perspective, the idea of extraterrestrial life is quite natural, right? Well, of course, there are going to be other realms, because from this traditional Indian perspective, that's the way the universe is. It's vast. There are many, many places, many fields in which this sort of karmic activity can be played out. So I have a few reflections I want to share on just this broader question of extraterrestrial life. One question is, of course, have we already been contacted? Here you see George Tsoukalos from the Ancient Aliens TV series, Eric von Daniken's book Chariots of the Gods, of course, which started the whole field of the idea of ancient extraterrestrial contact. We have the book Communion by Whitley Strieber, just sort of representing or standing in for the idea of UFO abduction. And then, of course, I have here one of these photos from the U.S. government that show, actual objects that the United States military has observed and filmed, and it's not really sure what they are, right? So, of course, speculation abounds. Are they extraterrestrial? My view on this is essentially that these are all fascinating possibilities. Could intelligent life forms have come to Earth in the ancient past and been taken for gods? It's not an unreasonable possibility, but it doesn't seem to me to have been proven beyond what I would call a reasonable doubt, that there are many alternate explanations for the various kinds of artifacts that are put forth as evidence of ancient life forms. It could simply be that humanity itself has been very advanced at various times in history and capable of quite incredible things. So we really don't know whether we've been visited or contacted. And it seems to me in the case of, I've had some conversations with people who've had UFO experiences and what they regard as contact experiences. My sense of these is that they have the character of a religious experience. And what I mean by that is it is probative for those of us who've had the experience, right? If you've had that experience, then something has happened, right? This is real, but that cannot conclusively prove for anyone else who's not had the experience that it's not the case. For that, you need things like physical evidence and so on. And this is just not yet, it seems to me, has not yet reached the state where we can say definitively, yes, beings from other worlds have come to Earth. And again, if we grant really a whole lot of benefit of the doubt to people who talk about these experiences they've had, it's not obvious that these experiences are of extraterrestrial life in what we might call a conventional sense, beings from other planets. Perhaps this is some kind of extra dimensional experience, again, something like a religious experience, an encounter with some sort of being on a higher plane of consciousness. It may not have anything to do at all with life on other planets. So fascinating, but as yet unproven, in my opinion. Now, I come from the perspective that I think many of us do, that in such a vast universe, it seems the likelihood of Earth being the only location of what we would recognize as intelligent life seems to be very, very small. It seems there almost have to be some intelligent beings out there. But of course, we run into the famous Fermi Paradox. Where are they, right? Why has this not been conclusively proven, right? Where is everyone? And of course, there are a lot of theories about this. There's a whole discourse, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, about this question. Maybe civilizations tend not to survive their industrial era. It doesn't look that great for humanity right now, I hate to say, in terms of things like abuse of the climate, things like developing very powerful weapons of mass destruction without the wisdom to avoid using them. It could be that no or very few civilizations really make it past this inflection point. Maybe space is just too big. It could be there's lots of life out there and lots of intelligence and lots of interesting things going on in the universe, but we're all very, very far apart. It's not possible to travel faster than light. Signals can't travel faster than light. So we just won't ever meet. Or maybe it's just a matter of time. Maybe we haven't met them yet. Here are the Vulcans encountering humanity in Star Trek. It's supposed to happen later this century, according to the Star Trek timeline. Maybe we just need to be patient and keep looking, and it will happen. Maybe we're going about it in the wrong way. We're listening for radio signals, for example. Radio signals have been the primary focus of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Maybe only fairly primitive societies use radio. Radio is even being superseded on Earth to some extent. Fiber optics and so forth, various technologies are competing. It could be that listening for radio signals is like looking for smoke signals. There are just not that many beings using them. Or if we want to be humble, maybe we're just not that interesting. You know, we wonder, why haven't they come here? And the question is, why should they come here? When I looked for for a slide for this particular part of the presentation, I Googled bored alien. This is what I came up with. This is supposed to be a bored extraterrestrial, just thinking that we're not that interesting. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is that someone has to be the first. Maybe we're it. Maybe someday there will be vast extraterrestrial interstellar civilizations spread across the galaxy and across the universe, and they will look back at humanity as the beings that took the first step into the cosmos. I personally don't think this one is very likely, but again, it's not impossible. And we just really don't know the answer. And of course, the most grim possibility of all, for those of us who are excited about this idea of contacting other types of life, is that it's just not there. That highly unlikely possibility that in this vast universe, there's only one world that has evolved intelligent life is just true, right? It's that we are it, and that's all there is. So what does all this have to do with religion? And this was the question that I sort of set for myself when I was developing an earlier version of this presentation for Andrew's conference. What does religion or religiosity have? What bearing does it have on the question of extraterrestrial intelligence? And what bearing does the question of extraterrestrial intelligence have on religion? And it's actually an old question. The prospect of extraterrestrial intelligence is quite disruptive to at least certain what process philosopher David Ray Griffin calls supernaturalist forms of theism. My photograph here is this is a statue of Giordano Bruno, who was rather infamously put to death, burned at the stake in the Middle Ages for his beliefs about actually a variety of things. Some scholars have questioned whether his belief in life on other worlds was really a factor in his execution. But further research, most recent research on Giordano Bruno suggests that no, this was definitely one of the elements, that there was a stream of thought in the church that held that the idea of life on other worlds, life not descended from Adam, was heretical and was not something that could be accepted in Christianity. And there have been Christians who have sort of made this proclamation, you know, there's no extraterrestrial life, there can't be extraterrestrial life. So there's some versions of religion that seem to be quite threatened by this idea. And one of the things I want to emphasize today is that that's not universally the case. Not only, of course, are there versions of Christianity, for example, that are quite open to this idea, but again, if you look to the traditions of India, not only are they open to the idea, but they've really been saying something like it for quite a long time. Are there multiple divine incarnations, right? This is a question that comes up if we think in terms of religion, especially if you're thinking in terms of Christianity. Of course, one of the central Christian teachings is that God took human form as Jesus, and that this was essential and necessary for human salvation. Well, when I was growing up in the Catholic tradition, and of course, being a science fiction fan, one of my questions was, well, did that then have to happen on all the various extraterrestrial worlds? Right? If that's part of God's plan of salvation, are there many such incarnations? And I have a couple of perspective ones that I've put here. There's Surak of Vulcan from Star Trek. There's Yoda from Star Wars. They seem like good candidates, right? If we want to talk about enlightened beings on other worlds. I'm just sort of using them as examples. Um, this is the kind of question that can undermine certain orthodoxies, right? Of course, if you talk about multiple divine incarnations, then you're right at home in the world of Hinduism, right? Where there is the idea, again, that there have been many such beings. There are Hindus who are happy to accept the idea that Jesus was such an incarnation or avatar. Krishna, pictured here, playing the flute, probably one of the most famous and visible of the Hindu avatars. You also have Ram, who was a very important, very revered deity in the Hindu tradition. And in modern Hinduism, this idea has been extended to other religions as well. Lao Tzu, the Buddha. In fact, the Buddha was sort of appropriated as an avatar about 1,000 years ago into the Hindu tradition. On the upper right corner, there's Ramakrishna. He was the teacher of Swami Vivekananda, also regarded by many as an avatar. So again, if you're coming from a Hindu perspective, this idea of multiple divine incarnations is not disruptive at all to religiosity, and in fact could be seen to be a logical extension of certain Hindu ideas. Here's a traditional depiction of the 10 avatars. There were multiple lists of these avatars. And what's interesting here in terms of our conversation is you'll see that some of them are not human. There on the upper left, you see the Matsya avatar, that's the fish avatar, Kurma, the tortoise avatar, Varaha, the boar avatar, Narasimha, the man lion. You have Vamana, the dwarf. And then you have various human avatars, Parashuram, Ram, Krishna, Buddha, and Kalki, who's the avatar yet to come. That's a kind of conventional list of 10 avatars. There's also a list of 24 avatars, and there's another list of 108 avatars in the Bhagavata Purana, one of the Hindu scriptures. So again, this idea of multiple forms of life that could create multiple arenas in which the divine reality can manifest itself is not problematic from the perspective of Indian traditions. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, whenever dharma declines and chaos arises, then do I manifest myself to destroy evil and restore the good. I appear age after age. So this idea of multiple avatars, multiple divine manifestations or incarnations, very, very old idea in Hinduism. So this is one of the things that was disturbing to the church in Bruno's time, not disturbing at all from an Indic perspective. No less than Carl Sagan weighed in on Hinduism and the way it fits into kind of contemporary cosmological vision. Sagan says, quote, the Hindu religion is the only one of the world's great faiths dedicated to the idea that the cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite number of deaths and rebirths. It is the only religion in which the timescales correspond to those of modern scientific cosmology. Its cycles run from our ordinary day and night to a day and night of Brahma, 8.64 billion years long, longer than the age of the Earth or the Sun, and about half the time since the Big Bang. The only thing I would correct, I think, in Sagan's quote is when he says Hindu religion is the only one of the world's great faiths that does this. Buddhism and Jainism as well, all three of these ancient Indian traditions really partake of the same basic cosmology, with some differences across traditions and even internally to each tradition. But this general idea of a very ancient, very vast in both time and space universe, and which contains many, many forms of life, many worlds, many realms, is a very, very old idea in the tradition, and you see it throughout Hindu and Buddhist and Jain scriptural literature. So a vast cosmos with many inhabited worlds is not a new idea for the Hindu, Buddhist, or Jain traditions. This is a nice modern example. This is a book by the founder of the Hare Krishnas, ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada wrote Easy Journey to Other Planets. And how do you easily journey to other planets? Well, there are forms of meditation that are designed to take you there. This is talking about astral travel. And so the whole idea is, again, that the physical body is not our sole reality, and that we are existing on multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. And it's possible to travel through some of these other vibrational levels to other worlds. It's a very, very old idea in Hindu tradition. And there's Tibetan Buddhist literature that is of a very similar kind, talks about various types of meditation that are supposed to be able to take you to other worlds. If all of this proves to be true, maybe this solves our problem of not being able to travel faster than light, because the idea is time and space operate differently in these other realms. So when it comes to extraterrestrials themselves, assuming they exist, will they have religion? Maybe religion is a peculiarly human expression. People who are generally skeptical about or dismissive of religion might call it a peculiarly human malady that does not necessarily afflict other life forms. Even if you have a more positive view of religion, it makes sense to raise this question, because even on Earth, we find that the varieties of what we often now call religion often stretch the definition of that word to the point where sometimes people even question the utility of the word religion. If traditions as different as, say, Roman Catholicism and Confucianism can both fall under this heading, how meaningful is the word religion? Because these are so different in so many ways. So it is a good question. Will extraterrestrials have religion? And if they do, what are we to make of that as human beings? What will be the relationship if there is an encounter between human religiosity and extraterrestrial religiosity? Of course, a lot of this depends on how we define religion. Right? If you define religion in a very restrictive way, even many human traditions don't fit the category, right? Many people identify religion with belief in God, for example. Well, then we lose Buddhism, Jainism, Confucianism, and Taoism. So, that maybe is too restrictive. But of course, the danger of defining religion too broadly is that it becomes a meaningless term. Right? If it includes everything from Christmas Mass at the Vatican to a football match, then maybe it's too inclusive of a term. But it seems to center around, as the theologian Paul Tillich said, ultimate concerns, issues of ultimate concern. It involves certain sort of recognizable traits like the idea of a sacred space, the idea of certain ritual actions that are engaged in, and of course, a worldview that tries to be all-encompassing and all-defining. So all of these things are ways of potentially defining religion. I would want to argue that there are certain basic questions that are likely to be universal. The one that I think of right away is death. This appears to be a universal phenomenon. Maybe we'll encounter some extraterrestrials who've conquered death, but that means they, at least at some point in their history, encountered it and found it to be a problem to be overcome. But the question of death raises the question of the meaning of our existence. What kind of universe is so cruel as to take away from us those that we love, that we're close to? Is there something more than this life that can perhaps give us hope that we don't have to just live with this irreparable loss, but that our loved ones still exist somewhere? They've been reborn, they've gone to heaven, whatever the belief might be. I would expect that any life form that would have developed intelligence in the way that we could potentially recognize it as human beings would have asked those questions and have come up with answers that could be recognizably religious. So if we just sort of run with that idea, at least for the moment, for the sake of the discussion, I want to then turn to Swami Vivekananda and what I'm calling cosmic pluralism, which essentially means openness to whatever beliefs, whatever religion might have developed out there in the cosmos. And why should we be open to that? Well, this goes to Swami Vivekananda's teaching about human religion. And one of the most famous statements of, he has many statements of a similar kind, but one of the most famous ones, one of the ones that is most frequently cited within the Vedanta tradition, is this statement from Swami Vivekananda. It comes from a lecture that he gave in 1900 called "The Way to the Realization of a Universal Religion." And he believed there were universal truths and that all religions expressed some piece of the larger universal truth, that they were ultimately compatible, and that they were all helpful to all of us who are trying to achieve realization of whatever it is our ultimate goal, however we conceive our ultimate goal, realization of the true nature of the self, oneness with the divine, and so on. So Swami Vivekananda says, I accept all religions that were in the past and worship with them all. I worship God with every one of them in whatever form they worship him. I shall go to the mosque. I shall enter the Christian's church and kneel before the crucifix. I shall enter the Buddhistic temple where I shall take refuge in Buddha and in his law. I shall go into the forest and sit down in meditation with the Hindu who is trying to see the light which enlightens the heart of everyone. Not only shall I do all these, but I shall keep my heart open for all that may come in the future. Is God's book finished, or is it still a continuous revelation going on? It is a marvelous book, these spiritual revelations of the world. The Bible, the Vedas, the Quran, and all other sacred books are but so many pages, and an infinite number of pages remain yet to be unfolded. I would leave it open for all of them. We stand in the present, but open ourselves to the infinite future. We take in all that has been in the past, enjoy the light of the present, and open every window of the heart for all that will come in the future. I've bolded this because I take this to be really the essential statement of cosmic pluralism. Salutations to all the prophets of the past, to all the great ones of the present, and to all that are to come in the future. So Swami Vivekananda basically teaches that religion is one, that despite the many very obvious differences between religions in terms of worldviews, in terms of practices, and so on, that there is a core of experience that underlies them all, and that they are constructed to evoke and create this depth experience of ourselves, of existence. And he conceives of this in terms of oneness and interconnection, that we conceive of our profound interconnection with all of reality, not only all human beings, but all of existence. And so because there's been so much conflict in the name of religion and so much fighting based on religious difference, one of Vivekananda's main messages to the world was that we should not look on other religions, whatever our religion is, or even if we have no religion, we should not look on people with other worldviews as rivals or as people with whom we need to be in conflict. We're all on a journey to the realization of highest truth. We all have different ways of going about it, but we can all learn from one another, and we should be open to that. And what I think, what I find particularly powerful about this particular passage that I've read to you is that he's not only open to all the religions that exist currently on earth or the ones that have come from down to us from the past, but he opens up the idea that there will be different religions in the future. There'll be other religions in the future. And of course, from a human perspective, extraterrestrial religion is a religion of the future, because even if it's very ancient, even if there's an extraterrestrial religion that's more ancient than the earth itself, to us it will be new, right? To us it will be something in the future. It will be something we will encounter. And Vivekananda argues that the path to wisdom is the path of openness to all that comes, right? Whatever comes our way, whatever new light we can experience from beings who may be radically different from us. And this is something I want to turn to now as well, which is how radically different from religiosity as we know it as humans, how different that might be among extraterrestrials, because extraterrestrial life itself will no doubt be radically different from what we think of as life and what we think of certainly in human terms. The science fiction has done kind of a mixed job of this. These are what I call prosthetic extraterrestrials. These are all from Star Trek. And you have a Cardassian, a Klingon, and a Telonian, and you can distinguish them by their different foreheads, right? You know, and Star Trek sometimes has been ridiculed a little bit for, okay, you should just have a different forehead every week, and you have a different extraterrestrial. But you know, just think about life on Earth. You know, the difference between a human being and a tree, for example, and we're from the same biosphere, right? So just imagine how radically different extraterrestrial life might be, and then how its view of reality, how it's what we might try to call religion might be. There have been some very good attempts also in science fiction to depict a radically other extraterrestrial intelligence. A few samples. One of my personal favorites, maybe my favorite, is Stanley Kubrick's, of course, authored by Arthur C. Clarke, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Here we have the famous monolith. I'm sure everybody here has probably seen this movie, probably multiple times, but the extraterrestrials in question, we never actually even see in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but we see their artifacts. We see the monolith. Its very presence causes early hominids to start to become a little more aggressive and a little more intelligent, and they evolve into human beings. There's a quick fast forward to the 21st century. You have satellites and spacecraft. And then, of course, a similar monolith, in fact, an identical monolith, is found on the moon. And it sends a signal out to Jupiter, and human beings, you know, send out a spacecraft to see, well, what is this? You know, who has created this? And of course, a massive monolith is then discovered in orbit around Jupiter. I'm giving away the whole movie in case anyone hasn't seen it, but the astronaut David Bowman goes out to encounter the monolith and is transformed, right? His just as the early monolith transforms the early hominids into human beings, he becomes the next stage in our evolution, simply by encountering this extraterrestrial artifact. And I think in some ways it's a parable about how the encounter with extraterrestrial intelligence will transform us. It certainly will in many ways. And you don't even have to see the extraterrestrials in Stanley Kubrick's film to experience the power of what they represent. Another great one, recent one that I really have enjoyed a lot. This is called The Arrival. And this is an encounter with an extraterrestrial species whose language causes them to experience time in a different way than the linear past, present, future fashion that human beings are accustomed to. And the main character is a linguist who's been hired to try to communicate with them, played brilliantly by Amy Adams. And she learns their language, and by learning their language, she also begins to experience time in the way that they do. So again, you have a sign of how the encounter with a radically different intelligence can transform us. It's fascinating when the extraterrestrials in the film, I don't want to spoil it too much, but when they explain why they have come, that's the question humanity is asking: why are you here? And they explain that in the distant future, they will be endangered and human beings will save them. But to save them, the human beings need a certain technology that they don't have yet. So they've come to our time to give us that, so that we'll be prepared to help them when they need us in the future. So it's this beautiful vision of interdependence as well. Not only the idea of radical difference, but the idea that even beings from a completely different world might be interdependent with us, much in the same way that life on Earth is interdependent. And we've learned a lot about that through the years of ecology, and how even one small impact on the environment can affect everything in a very profound way. Another favorite of mine is Solaris. Here we have the intelligent ocean on another planet, on the planet Solaris. And it's trying to communicate with human beings, and does so through various manifestations that it draws from our own minds. And of course, in a very famous scene, one of the astronauts encounters his dead wife, who it's not really his wife, it's a projection from Solaris, but it's so real that it puts him into really a state of emotional turmoil. And the human beings trying to wrestle with this radically different life form, and that's trying to contact them and trying to communicate with them, but really doesn't quite know how. These radically other conceptions of life bring us to one last question that I would like to conclude with in my remarks today, which is a question that the search for extraterrestrial life raises, which is just, well, what is life anyway, right? What is life? How do we differentiate between the living and the non-living? All right, we talk about the lives of stars, for example. We talk about the birth and death of stars. Now, we may be speaking metaphorically, but there's also a substantive reality that we're pointing to when we talk about that birth and death. There's a sense in which the death of a star gives life to other stars. And then not only to the stars, but through the various elements that are created in that process to beings like us, right? The universe is generative of life. Is there a sense in which the universe itself is alive? Is the universe an organism? And this is really where the thought of Alfred North Whitehead comes in. Fellow Whiteheadian, he also spoke at the same conference that Chelsea and I spoke at, Andrew's conference. Matthew Segal says, life is a matter of degree, right? Rather than make a hard and fast division, say this is living matter, this is non-living matter, we really have to think of a continuum. And that even if you look at the level of subatomic particles, things seem to be going on that don't fit the description of dead matter that sort of classical materialism would have put forth at one time. So we are in a living organic universe. We're part of that living organic universe. And really, here's where process thought and the Indian traditions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism really converge. The idea that the cosmos itself is a living thing. In one of the Vedanta traditions, the Vishishtadvaita tradition of Ramanuja, it's taught that the cosmos is the body of God, and that God is the soul of the cosmos. And the idea that this is one organism, and we are all part of that organism, this is really fundamental to Indian thought, and it's something that Whiteheadian thought is also proposing. And really, this comes to one of my favorite Carl Sagan quotes. Got two Carl Sagan quotes in this talk. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself, Carl Sagan said. And the we here is interesting. He doesn't say we human beings, right? Just conscious entities, right? We are the cosmos, and our quest for knowledge is the cosmos knowing itself. And it's us knowing ourselves through knowing the cosmos, seeing the cosmos as a mirror in which we see ourselves reflected. And we're, of course, part of that. The search for life in the cosmos is part of our quest to know ourselves, for the cosmos to know itself. The first version of this talk that I gave actually was a few days before our conference in Oregon, which Andrew was running. I spoke at the Vedanta Society of New York, which was the original Vedanta Society that Swami Vivekananda founded. And the Q&A afterward was really very, I mean, it has shaped my subsequent versions of this talk. But one of the things that really came out strongly, that was to a group of practitioners, a group of primarily Hindu practitioners, believers, saying, what is the point of this search for extraterrestrial intelligence if it does not ultimately lead us to self-knowledge, which is the ultimate goal of Vedanta? And self-knowledge here, we're talking about self with a capital S, right? The Atman, the self that encompasses all of existence, not our ego self, right? The highest ideal is self-knowledge, realizing that highest self of which we are all a part. And I see the search for extraterrestrial life as part of the process of this self-knowing. We know the self, we know God, we could say, if you want to use theistic language, through knowing the universe. And we are that universe knowing itself. And we want to encounter other centers of consciousness, other centers of that knowing. So on that, I hope, inspirational thought, I'll conclude my formal remarks. And maybe it looks like there's some questions in the chat. I'll hand it back to Richard to conduct this.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Jeffrey. That was really fascinating. Yeah, lots of, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. I certainly had jotted down a few, but does somebody else want to jump in first with a question, so I don't hog the limelight. Robert, do you want to?
Just for now, for the first point, I think we actually can describe life with a degree of precision, although there may be difficulties at the edges. But life evidently is something which reproduces itself, which moves and fuels itself and excretes, digests its food, converts it into energy, and maintains stability, and has some kind of grasp of its circumstances. So I think you can give some idea of what life is. And on those grounds, I don't think you can say that the universe is alive, because the universe doesn't do any of those things at all. And there really is no sort of connection between the two. It may do all sorts of things, but it doesn't do any of those things.
So that's I think a fair point. When I look at Hindu philosophy, there is and this could be sort of dismissed as just sort of a peculiar cultural bias, but there's an idea that if we start with the premise that even if the universe is, let's say, not alive, we can say it's generative of life. And if it's generative of life, that means, coming from a Hindu perspective, that it always has within it the potential to be generative of life, right? So that life in some sense is embedded, you could say, in the essence of the universe. This would be for a sort of a Hindu perspective. I think that would be a fair way to qualify it, that if we're saying the universe is alive, that's sort of a rather poetic way of speaking, but that in a given more precision, we're saying that it contains the potential for and is generative of life. And another sort of, this is both a Hindu and Buddhist, I would say, kind of take on this as well, that given that we are part of the universe, that an exhaustive definition of the universe then would have to include living beings like ourselves. So that could be maybe an extended meaning. Again, maybe it's becoming more poetic or metaphorical at this point of talking about the universe being alive. But I think that that's a fair point that you've made, that there's certainly purposes for which we can define parameters and say something's alive, something's not alive. And there's another aspect of this as well too, is that if something is alive, from the perspective not only of Indian traditions, but I say most religious traditions, is if something is alive, it places a moral obligation upon us of some kind. For example, not to harm it, or not to treat it cruelly, or not to inflict pain upon it. And of course, I'm sitting on my chair. I didn't ask it for permission. I'm sipping tea from my cup. I didn't ask my cup for permission. So certainly, I think we have to, in a practical level, make distinctions of the kind that you've said. So your point's well taken.
I just very briefly to say, I'll also make the same point, but I won't, because I don't really deserve two bites of this particular cherry, But I would also say the same things about rationality, and indeed about this connection with language.
Yes, certainly.
You can't say that of the universe.
I mean, as far as we know, right? If it's speaking to us, we have not learned its language. I think also that, again, many of the traditions will speak in a way that if we're trying to be precise, we have to say, well, these must be extended metaphors or a kind of poetic way of speaking. I mean, someone can have a very moving experience of observing the night sky and say the universe has spoken to me, but certainly it hasn't used English, for example. It hasn't engaged in what we're engaging in right now.
Good. Ahmad, do you want to chip in?
Just a quick question. Is Hinduism geocentric? Does it have the Earth at the center of the universe?
Not anymore, but some of the older cosmologies, if we take them literally, some of the artistic representations of them, not only are they geocentric, they are Indocentric. India is at the center of the universe. There's a description in many of the early Indic texts of something called Jambudvipa. Jambudvipa is this vast island, and it has these sort of four peninsulas sticking out of it. In the center of it is Mount Meru, and that's the center of the universe. And then the southern landmass sticking out from this central island is basically identified with India. So those are the older models, but it's a living tradition. So as more knowledge about the actual shape of the earth and so on has come in, this has all been re-articulated and redefined in different ways. And of course, there's always that aspect too of having to interpret the scripture on there's a literal level, but then there are sort of what are called subtle levels of interpretation, where what we're told is that there's actually a deeper meaning being conveyed here. Sort of like I was just saying a moment ago, sort of on a poetic or metaphorical level. So there has not been the kind of literalism where, like, for example, like if you sail very far, you'll fall off the edge of the earth, that sort of thing. That kind of thinking has not been present so much in Hinduism. But yes, the older depictions, yeah, there's the big island in the middle, and there's India right there.
Ahmed, your microphone is off.
Hinduism and Buddhism, as I understand it, they have an infinite conception of time.
Yes.
Do they have this idea of everything recurring? Everything that's happened is going to happen again and again?
Well, there is the idea of cycles, but not in the sense of precisely the same events recurring. But you have the idea that the cosmos itself goes through, again, it's depicted as something like a living thing. This is sometimes depicted as the divine in breath and out breath. So the God is breathing out, and the cosmos emerges. And so you have something like a big bang, and you have the emergence of life. And then eventually God inhales and the whole thing gets reabsorbed. That's called the Mahapralaya, and everything goes back into a latent potential state. And then eventually it reemerges. But what reemerges is not identical to what came before. So it's not eternal recurrence in the kind of Nietzschean sense. It's more of a cyclical, I think maybe even spiral is a better term than cyclical, because you do have linear time, but there's a recurrence of patterns. So patterns of emergence, existence, and then destruction, and then reemergence. And then these are also personified. So you have Brahma representing creation, Vishnu representing the preservation and perseverance of existence, and then Shiva bringing about the end so that a new beginning can come about. And so that's been the way it's been depicted traditionally.
That nicely leads on to a question I was going to ask, which I think you've sort of answered. I was gonna, you at the beginning, you had the pictures of the different realms, and the sort of top realms were heavenly and God realms.
Mm-hmm.
Are those gods in a different sense to avatars like Vishnu?
Yes.
Because otherwise, wouldn't that mean that we're on a par with, in some sense, we're just a bit karmically behind them?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's where sometimes the English word God is insufficient for the various Sanskrit terms that are used for these different types of beings. So you have Ishvara, the supreme being, who is really God in a monotheistic sense, creator, preserver, destroyer, and recreator of the universe. And that is the being that will sometimes manifest as an avatar. And the avatar, you could say, both is and is not divine. Is in the sense of, the divine consciousness is believed to be there and present, but the avatar, has a body. The avatar is born and dies, and so on, and so it is not divine in that sense. And then you have beings that are called Devas, and they are more or less in charge of kind of governing the universe. And if you wanted to translate them into English, probably angel might be a better term than God, because they are finite beings. And yeah, we could actually be reborn as one of them. You know, if you have really, really good karma, you could be, say, the Indra of the next universe. So that's possible. And they are also mortal. There is a term amrita, which is often translated as immortality in Sanskrit, but it really means living for a very, very long time. And when the cosmic cycle comes to an end, these devas also all come to an end. That they perish with the rest of the universe. And then new devas are born in the next cosmic cycle. And they may be different beings. They may be reincarnations of beings who had very good karma from the previous cycle. So, like I said, the current Indra was probably something else in a previous universe. So that's the idea. So yeah, using the word God can be a little confusing, because you have God and gods, and they are different. They play different roles. And then you have, when you're talking about God, the supreme being, you also have deities who are manifestations of different aspects of that being. So again, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, for example, they're all Ishvara. They're all the one. And so that's different from the many devas, for example.
And how is nirvana? Because I've studied a little bit of the Advaita Vedanta tradition. So, so then I think of nirvana and moksha in terms of extinguishing them or reuniting with the ultimate.
Right.
How do they live in these more dualist schemes?
Yeah, so they're more dualistic schemes where that is conceived as a kind of loving union with God, almost akin to Christianity, where you are eternally with God in a joyful, blissful state. So in the more dualistic traditions, the more theistic, like the Vaishnava tradition, for example, that's how it's understood. Whereas, like you said, in Advaita Vedanta, it's more like waking up from a dream, realizing you were never really you, but you are the infinite, and the infinite is all there is. And it's a different understanding of that. But then you have people like Swami Vivekananda who say these are just different ways of trying to describe the indescribable, that it's a state that's really utterly beyond anything we can conceive of. So you can talk about eternal bliss with God, you can talk about the drop falling into the ocean and merging, but they're all metaphors and don't quite capture the actual experience.
Okay, yeah, and so the devas then they've not quite reached the ultimate goal. Presumably, they're sort of one step away.
That's right. That's right, and that's why in the Buddhist literature, the devas are among the people who come and listen to the Buddhist teach, because even though he's a mere mortal and they're gods, he knows the path to nirvana and they don't. So they go on. Yes. Yeah, so both the Buddhist and Jain tradition place enlightened beings actually at the top of the hierarchy. Devas are below that.
Yeah. I guess then that I mean, I will just ask one more question and then I'll stop. A more critical question, but I sort of felt I had to ask it. A sort of fairly standard criticism of pluralism, so it may be a gimme for you. Standard sort of criticism, though, of pluralist accounts of religion, you know, this idea that it's an elephant and the Christian thinks it's a snake, he's got the trunk, and a Muslim thinks it's a rope because he's got the tail.
Right.
Standard objection. How does Swami Vivekananda, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, know that these religions are actually compatible? How is he able to step back and see it all unless he's got a perfect understanding of all the religions, given that on the face of them, and indeed when people dedicate their lives to studying Islam and Christianity, they really, really seem incompatible. So what does he know that we don't, and how did he arrive at that knowledge?
How did he arrive at it? That's a very good question. So in his particular case, he learned it from his teacher, Ramakrishna, who, according to the traditional accounts of his life, practiced a variety of different traditions, different forms of Hinduism, as well as Christianity and Islam. And he would practice each with great dedication and devotion until he achieved something called samadhi, which is a state of perfect absorption, complete union with the object of one's contemplation. So he had experiences, Ramakrishna had experiences of union with the various Hindu deities, also with the infinite Brahman of Advaita Vedanta, and with Jesus and with the God of Islam. And now, of course, that's a claim you would have to take on faith. You could say, well, maybe he was just deluded, or, there are theories that he had epilepsy. In fact, I think he probably did have epilepsy. I don't think that's necessarily incompatible with his claims, but he claimed on an empirical basis. He said, I have practiced each one of these. They've led me to the same goal. Therefore, they all lead to the same goal. That's the basic logic. Now, again, there are various ways of critiquing that and saying that, well, did he really practice them, for example? It's said that his Islamic sadhana, for example, only lasted for 3 days. How could that be? Right? Of course, then you could also say, well, maybe Islam is just a very fast path to God. So, it worked fine. But within the tradition, that is the understanding that he achieved this empirically, and that people who are part of the tradition basically are saying, we believe that's true and that that's possible, and that we could also achieve that eventually. But that Ramakrishna was a kind of a spiritual virtuoso and was able to do it all, in a single lifetime. And that's why some people believe he himself was an avatar, because there were people during his lifetime who observed his various spiritual states and who were experts in these things from, their study of the Hindu scriptures and so on. And they said, no normal human being could achieve all of these the way he has achieved them. So it's a belief. I'd say it's a matter of faith. My personal argument for pluralism is I go more in from the direction of William James's pragmatism, which is if we take pluralism as a working theory. Now I'm skipping a bunch of steps just to answer your question, but I would argue that we end up with a better world if we think pluralistically, that this logically ought to evoke respect for one another's traditions, desire to study and learn about one another's traditions, coexist, engage in dialogue, and that this is so much better than much of what we've been doing for the last few thousand years. So my argument is more of a pragmatic argument, that this is a working theory which has produces good results if we're consistent with it. Of course, another problem is people aren't always consistent with it. The Hindus who are deeply committed to this way of thinking, and yet who maybe in their lives or in their politics are, much more suspicious of other communities and other traditions. And this has been a problem in India's history of, that there is conflict between religions. But for me, that just underscores the importance of pluralism, that it's something that the world needs. And what I was trying to do in my talk was sort of find grounds in the teaching of Swami Vivekananda for extending that also to extraterrestrial life. That a similar kind of openness, I think, would serve us well when or if we encounter such beings.
Yep, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm sure we could keep discussing that, but no, I can see where you're coming from. And I hadn't heard the William James pragmatic approach. That's an interesting one. I'll have to mull that one over.
Well, thank you. I ought to copyright that. I presented on it at the American Academy of Religion a couple of years ago, and made that argument. And another argument, another critique, which I thought you were maybe going to express, or maybe this was kind of contained in your critique, is that doesn't pluralism itself become one more worldview asserting itself against the others? And I think that's, to some extent, I think that's a valid point. It becomes what some scholars call inclusivism, right, rather than pluralism, because it is claiming to have a somewhat higher vantage point than the others. A lot of pluralists are deeply uncomfortable with that. I just accept it as we think this is a better way of thinking, and that's okay, because we're not using that then as the basis for arguing for the extinction of the other traditions or anything of that kind.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I can. Yeah. I'm going to mull that over. But yes. I see. Yeah. Yes. I think I have heard that response before. Yeah.
Maybe.
Good. We've got another maybe 4 minutes or so till about 1/4. Then I'll stop the recording. We can then chat a little bit informally. But maybe then one more question or a couple of minor questions. Ahmad?
Ahmad has a question.
In Arabic tradition, we have stories of genies kidnapping people and taking them to their realm, and that's even before Islam. Do they have the same thing in Hinduism?
I'd have to think about it. There is a story of there's a creature called a Rakshasa who kidnaps Sita, the wife of Ram, and takes her off to his realm. And he's said to be the Lord of Lanka. Most people assume that means the actual island of Sri Lanka, but there's some debate about that. Maybe it's some kind of celestial Lanka as well. And he abducts her. And then the whole story of the Ramayana is then the effort of Ram to rescue her and get her back. And that also involves non-human life forms, because you have talking apes, talking birds, and various other creatures who are also involved in that. So yeah, it has a very sci-fi feel to it. But what you're talking about, saying about the jinn, really sounds like alien abduction to me. That's quite remarkable. I'm not familiar with that.
Check the book that I put the link on, the Farland book.
I will.
The Yemeni author, he mentions that himself in talking about the stories. And I mean, even in UFO literature, they note that there's similarities with something about they take into the magic realm and they give them certain delicious kinds of things like that. So, yeah, I mean, the word for myth in Arabic is khurafa, and it comes from a guy called Khurafi who claimed to have been kidnapped by the jinns.
Oh, interesting.
From the hidden realm. Jinn means secluded or hidden. And concerning inclusivism, you're spot on. Kim Stanley Robinson, his book, The Years of Rice and Salt, it starts out as a very pluralist book looking with different civilizations and religions, but it ends with Muslims being the fundamentalist fanatics.
Right.
And sort of the Buddhists or Chinese being the people who deserve to be modeled, something like that.
Right. Right.
It's in California, so I suppose
I need to read that.
Okay.
Okay. No, it sounds like these jinn stories then are, I mean, they're not just kind of incidental or odd. So it sounds like they're pretty foundational to the tradition in a sense. Like you said, like the word for myth is derived from that. So that's really interesting. And, you know, again, if we look at the abduction phenomenon as a phenomenon without assuming that it involves extraterrestrial life, but it's just, okay, this is what people claim to have experienced. It seems to me reasonable that something like this has been, that there have been some subset of human beings who've had these experiences for millennia, because you do find stories of this kind across cultures and across time. But what they're experiencing is of course the big question, whether it's a psychological phenomenon or a spiritual phenomenon or an extraterrestrial phenomenon. I said, wait, I just don't think we know enough to say.
Perfect. Well, let me just wrap up then for our YouTube viewers online, and then we can have a little bit of an informal chat afterwards. But YouTube viewers, I hope you found that as fascinating as I did. I thought it was really interesting. If you did, then don't forget to like and then subscribe, because we're going to have lots of other really interesting talks in the coming months. And if you haven't watched some of our previous videos, then do also watch some of those. But I think that's it for this talk, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
All right.